The report by the Commission's Task Force on Corrections clearly expressed the optimism of the times. If we could walk on the moon, surely we could solve our social problems. In the Commission's opinion, offenders and delinquents needed individualized treatment to reduce or eliminate their criminal activities. The report focused on reintegration, community-based programs, and rehabilitation, reflecting a belief in the rehabilitative model of corrections within an indeterminate system of decision-making. Dramatic social changes occurred shortly after the Commission completed its report that impacted correctional policy and practice. The optimism of the 1960s gave way to turmoil and a despairing distrust of the state. Research suggested nothing worked to reduce recidivism. These dynamics moved corrections far from the focus on rehabilitation promoted by the Commission. A correctional control perspective replaced the focus on rehabilitation. The philosophy focused on putting more offenders in prison for longer periods of time to incapacitate or deter them from criminal activities. A major impact of these policy changes was an enormous increase in the number of people under correctional supervision. The numbers overloaded the system so that crowding and management issues became central to decision-making. Treatment and rehabilitation became secondary. Researchers examined whether these new laws designed to incapacitate and deter people from crime actually had this impact. Others investigated whether punishment-oriented programs such as boot camps, intermediate sanctions, or scared straight reduced recidivism of participants. While some of the correctional control policies may have reduced crime, the results were ambiguous. It became clear these policies were not meeting their objectives and instead creating problems. Among other issues were the lack of programs to address the needs of offenders, particularly the drug programs to address those involved with drugs or those with mental health issues, high recidivism rates, costs, negative impacts on individuals and communities, lack of discretion even when cases warranted leniency. Issues such as these led correctional officials, policymakers, and researchers to explore new directions. Recent research and practice have shifted towards being more evidence-based. Today, many correctional officials, as well as policymakers, advocate for evidence-based programming. Interventions that have been found to reduce recidivism are those that include a human service component. Today, many and focus on positive individual level change. These findings demonstrate that interventions such as academic and vocational education, cognitive skills, multi-component programs, drug treatment courts, and drug treatment are effective and thus can be considered evidence-based. In contrast, in general, interventions focusing on punishment, deterrence, or control have not been found to be effective and therefore not evidence-based. Renewed confidence that interventions can effectively reduce recidivism, continuing concern about the burgeoning prison and jail populations, and knowledge that most incarcerated individuals will be released and returned to their local communities led the federal government to fund the Serious and Violent Offender Reentry Initiative and the Second Chance Act to improve the prospects for individuals returning from prison. Considering the future and a new crime commission, Are we at the beginning of a new radical change for corrections? There are some indications that change is on the horizon. Social turmoil seems to be growing. Despite the research findings showing violent and property crime have decreased, public opinion surveys indicate the public believes crime is up. Some policymakers advocate for a return to the time of correctional control and widening the net of correctional control. Other voices arise to combat this perspective. Many foundations and organizations from across the political spectrum have focused on reform to reduce jail and prison populations. Furthermore, the current opiate heroin epidemic affects white and middle-class families, as well as minorities. The earlier drug war, with its emphasis on severe punishments, strongly impacted our minorities in inner cities. Today, many people with a stronger voice in government, the white and privileged, have a vested interest in solving the current crisis in a humane way, with treatment rather than prison. These voices may mitigate some efforts to exclusively focus on a control philosophy solutions. Many of the 1967 Commission's recommendations are supported by evidence-based research of today. A new commission must take into consideration the current political environment. We hope that a new commission will examine the current conditions of local, state, and federal institutions, as well as conditions of private prisons and immigration detention centers run by government agencies or contractors. We hope a new commission will place more emphasis on research and evidence-based corrections. Among others, we would like to see a focus on program implementation, treatment and rehabilitation, alternatives to incarceration or criminal processing, reducing correctional populations, and moving abused and exploited children out of detention centers. We stand at a time when researchers have demonstrated that there are non-draconian responses to crime that can be effective in reducing criminal behavior. Researchers have also demonstrated the deleterious effects on individuals and communities of over-reliance on jails and prisons as a response to substance abuse and nonviolent crime. We are positioned to build on this knowledge developed over the past 40 or 50 years. The question is whether, given the turmoil of the times, the public and policymakers will make use of this information. Thank you.